painting fans. Robbie here with one of our artists,
Dave.
And today, before you, we have this awesome Hordes miniature. It's not really a miniature, I guess. This thing's huge. We'll bring in another miniature in a second to show you a size comparison. But this is the Legion of Everblight Archangel, I believe is what it's called. And this thing's awesome.
It's gorgeous. It's one of their better sculpts in my opinion.
Yeah. So much going on there with, it's not just standing there, but it's like up on this huge rock.
It kind of looks like a circle of Oberos, something like a
monolith or something,
yeah.
Kind of a waystone. Yeah. There's so much going on with this miniature. It's got arms and legs and wings and tails all over the place.
Spikes jutting out from everywhere. Legion of Everblight is a very interesting faction to paint, mainly due to their more ice, like Arctic background. A lot of their warcasters and troops have some ice-themed paint schemes, and this is one of them. So.
Yeah, I really like this. The colors seem to contrast nicely. You have those that kind of pale skin with the brown bone on there, and then the pink, kind of pink-purple wings. Looks really good all together.
This is the client's own custom paint scheme, which is very, in my opinion, brings out a lot of the contrast that you can bring out in a Legion of Everblight army. A lot of normal bone color. The brown color on this bone right here is done a different color, like bone or dark or something like this, but I really like the brown.
Yeah. So. In just a second, we're going to show you how to get that bone, how to paint that brown bone effect on the miniature.
It's fairly easy. This color scheme for the flesh is one of the ways to do it. They not only have this kind of pinkish bluish color, but a lot of times they'll go really light blue, like almost pale frozen blue paint skin color. Sometimes they'll do a really pink skin color, as where it's almost purpley pink. This balance in between is probably my favorite, where you can still see some of like the really light blue, but it's got that pink undertones that can really bring out a lot into the character of a model.
Alright, so we've got some other miniatures here now for a size comparison. On the far left over here, we have a Forsaken, I think that's called. And that's your regular standard miniature, human person miniature. And that thing is tiny compared to this huge guy. And then on the other side here, we've got a War Spear and a little Ripper. So you can kind of see the difference in how big this miniature is. I think this is awesome for a centerpiece, especially it's like like this huge dragon kind of looking over the rest of the army.
It's an amazing piece also because it's one of the few gargantuans that actually flies. I mean, obviously, a thing so big to be able to have wings and fly around the battlefield is pretty rare, and it's really well done in my opinion. 2 sets of wings actually. So I wanted to, with these wings, do something that would contrast with the flesh color that he's got right now, but still tie in with the bone color that I'd have to do later on. So I kind of went with this fleshy, dirty tone to make it stand out, but at the same time tie in with the rest of the model. So.
Yeah, I think overall it looks really good. Nice. It's a fairly simple palette. Not too many different crazy colors going on, but it all looks really good all together.
Yeah. And that's one of the things is, I mean, the model only has so many fields, and so you really want to make them each one distinct and look good. So that's what I tried to do, and it came out pretty well, I think. Okay, so to begin, the skin tone we're going to go for is essentially level 4. So I'm going to use 4 different paints. The first paint I'm going to do is to provide kind of a base coat of shadow gray. And this is going to provide, obviously, the base color to build up on for the rest of the skin tone. So what I'm going to do is dry brush. I'll get my brush wet, get the moisture out, make sure it's dry. Then I'm going to slather on some paint. And because we're essentially base coating using this technique, it's okay to make sure you have a lot of paint on the brush still. So then when you apply it, just make sure you apply it deeply into the crevices. Try not to get all the black shadows out of there, but make sure you get it really deep. So that way when you go in later on for later steps, you'll have that dark blue in some of the recesses. So apply it heavily throughout the skin of the model. Don't be too worried about getting it on the bone parts that you may be painting later on, because when you go through those steps, you'll be able to cover it up. So just make sure you apply it nice and thickly. Shouldn't take too long. So I'm just gonna touch it up a little bit more. I noticed I was a little sparing right there. So, and once you've got your base layer down, then you're gonna start adding a highlight. Okay, so the next paint, like I said, was gonna be pale blue. This is gonna provide another highlight. It may seem too bright at first, but don't worry about that. Our next steps, we'll be able to cover that up a little bit. So when you're applying this, it's another dry brushing technique, making sure that you're hitting the edges, but not going too deep into the cracks. It should be just highlighting the topmost part of the model. Now, the technique I'm using is it's more of a flat brush. It depends on the curvature of the model. This Tyranid is kind of have a lot of flat spaces, so that's why I'm using a flat brush, just so I can make sure I don't get too far into the crevices and or apply too much paint. This way I'm more easily able to control where my brush hits to provide that highlight just where I want. You can do this step either with a round brush or a more flat brush, the more traditional dry brush. It's up to you. If you have a smaller dry brush, that's probably the best way to do it. Me, I'm just kind of gonna go ham. So once this step's done, now we're gonna add that more pink fleshy tone into the miniature's skin tone. To do this, we're going to use Warlord Purple, and we're going to create a glaze. The difference between a glaze and a traditional wash is that the glaze is going to have a bit more pigment in it, so it's not going to be quite as runny. And when we apply it, we're going to apply it so that it doesn't run. We don't want it to run into all the crevices of the model. We want it to remain on the highlight, the high points, acting as sort of a tint. And this is going to allow us to keep the tones that we've already put into the model, but bring new values, essentially a new way of looking at it. So as you can see, my glaze is still a bit runny. If it does pull into the crevices, just make sure that you pull it out. Once you've applied as much as you can, just go back over the crevices and just pull it out of those small spots. It can be rough at first to get the right consistency. Just keep working at it. If it doesn't look right the first time, you can always just go back, add some more of the layer you did before, and then go back in and do another glaze. So now that we've got that, you can still see the different shadows and highlights. However, when you look at it, you should see that pink hue to both layers. And that's what you're looking for. That more pinkish hue to the model. So unfortunately, we have to let that dry. So we're going to move on to the skin. And the first, or the armor, essentially, the carapace. The first step to doing that is essentially the same thing we did for the skin. However, we're going to be using a brown, obviously. And because I want to be more careful, I'm not going to use the traditional dry brush. I'm going to use this round brush to essentially flat brush it on there. So that way we're more careful with where we place them. So I'm going to load up my brush. I'm going to get it off. And then some people can use the paper towels. You can just use your hand to make sure you're not globbing paint on there. And then when you go in, just make sure you cover up all of that. Oh, probably too far away from the camera. Make sure you cover up all the stuff you did before. You don't want those highlights in there. So essentially, we're going to go in and base coat the carapace just like we did for the skin. And when we're done adding all the different layers, you may not see much of this layer, but it is going to provide that shadow, that transition between the black primer and the highest highlights. So it's an important step, though it may not look it right now. Just be careful not to slop on your skin. But even then, like I said, we still have to finish the skin, so you can go back in and fix up any slops that you may have done before. It's one of the best things if you have a good plan before going into painting. You never need worry about slopping on your miniature because you've always got a plan to go back in and fix it. Okay. So, that's done. The skin looks like it's ready enough for our final highlight, which is going to be this light flesh, which is a really bright, almost elf-like flesh pigment. You could go either way here. You could probably go back in and highlight it with the pale blue again if you wanted a more blue skin tone, or you could go in with something darker, or you could go into something brighter, white even, to just change up the pig tones. The reason I chose this one is because it's got, for being as lighted as it is, it's still got a little bit of a pink pigment, so it's going to draw that pink, the Warlord color that we put in there, it's going to draw that out, which is what I'm looking for. I'll just make sure we're going to flat brush it on, essentially just highlight most of the, highlight most of the edges and highest portions on the model. I'm using a kind of a flat brushing technique. Just place it like where you want it, just so that way you achieve the highlights that you want. Don't be afraid to go heavily into this. Unfortunately, I'm not the greatest at skin, but when I did this model, I mean, I had to go back and forth a couple of times just to get it just right, because unfortunately, when you're staring at a model for a long time, it may seem like everything's hunky-dory, but when you go back and look at it for real, it might not be exactly how you wanted it. So for this guy, we're just going to mostly put it on the highest highlight of his tail, just so the underside's obviously going to remain a bit darker, and so we don't have to worry about doing the whole part of the tail. Always make sure you have enough paint off of your brush, especially when doing these final highlighting techniques. Making sure I've got it all. So now this skin tone is actually a little bit more pink than the skin tone for the other for the Archangel. So what I would do now is I'll probably go back in and apply a bit of a wash of this pale blue to bring back some of that blue. Or else I could even go in and highlight it. Blue again, and then highlight it with the flat flesh, which is maybe what I'll do instead. Oh, that's probably the wrong brush to do that with. Like I said, don't be afraid to go crazy because it's going to take a little bit to get it just right. And there, that's quite a bit better, especially on this side. And then just to smooth out the skin, apply another wash of whichever color you think is most appropriate. I would probably do, like I said, the pale blue. But we're going to move on to the carapace. So now that I've got that base color, I'm going to build up again using different colors to provide different highlights. So the next color I'm going to use after I used the German chocolate brown is I'm going to use chocolate brown, which is going to give us that segue into our earth and our final highlights. So I'm going to use it the same way as I did the German chocolate brown. It's going to be mostly a base coat. However, when I use it this way, you got to remember to always leave that base color in there. So that way, if you cover up everything that you just did, then you might as well not have done it. So you probably heard that quite a bit from BTP artists. The German chocolate brown is a really, really dark brown, almost to a black. And so it may seem like you've covered up all of it. You haven't, though. Don't worry about that. If you just make sure you're using good techniques, good flat brushing techniques, you should still be able to see it in the shadows, in the very, very deep recesses, when all said and done. Okay. So there's that. Now the next couple of steps, providing these final highlights, I'm going to do what's called, I don't know the proper name of the technique, but it's essentially, I'm going to be flat brushing it. However, I'm not going to get all of the paint that I would normally get off of my brush. You want your paintbrush to be a little bit moist, and then you want a paintbrush also that's a little bit frayed, one of your well-used paintbrushes. The more like bristles, the more kind of frayed that it is, the better it is for this step, because essentially each of those big thick bristles is going to act as if a claw, and you're going to claw it on, so that way you've got like the Tyranid highlights. So that's what we're going to do. Make sure your paintbrush is a little bit moist, don't let it be sopping wet, and then load up your paintbrush like you normally would, but don't get it all off. It should still feel moist to your hand. Now, when you're doing it, when you're applying the paint, make sure you're going against the grain, obviously, of the carapace. Make sure that, you know, as it's layered, it comes up. So this way, you kind of leave streak marks on the carapace. So as you see on this top one, you can see a lot of streak marks coming up it, and that's what you're looking for. If you notice that you're not like providing really big streak marks, a couple of problems you could be having is either your paintbrush isn't moist enough, or you may not have enough paint on there. Those are probably the two most common. So then just go back and you know, moisten your brush again and apply the paint again. It can be a little tricky getting in these spots, but you should be able to do it relatively easily after you've had a little bit of practice. And now, once I'm done with this step, I'm going to essentially repeat the step again using my final highlight, which is going to be colored called khaki. Now, you can use a smaller brush if you're not confident about keeping. Woohoo! Wow, what you get when you turn your paints over. Using a smaller brush can help, or you can just make sure that, you know, as you're doing it, you're careful not to cover up all you've done and kind of just provide that little final small highlight. This is a cool technique for not only Legion of Everblight, but also Tyranids and any other beast that you may have that's got carapace armor like this. And so that's what you're left with. The technique is essentially the same thing that I did for the Archangel. However, a lot of his armor plates are really big and shaped kind of weirdly, but that's the same thing you can do. So if I were to do it all the way up, I would do the same thing. When you're doing obviously protrusions like this, make sure you're coming down. But that's pretty much it. Pretty quick, pretty easy, and hopefully that helped you in your endeavors of starting your Legion of Everblight army.